One of the most common questions which comes up, I see all the time, is why didn't that student use academic language? And the question today is IELTS an academic test? So, my name is Chris from IELTS Daily. Let's talk about this topic quickly now. So the question, is IELTS an academic test? It's not as easy to answer as you might think, and I'm going to split this video, talk about each section of the test, and we will talk about the academic training and the general training types of the test that we have. Remember, if you learn something from this test, we always really appreciate giving a video a thumbs up and a like, because remember, the more you do that, the more it helps us. And if you want to become a paid member of the channel, you can do. Just follow the instructions on the page. So let's talk first about the listening section. Here's one common myth that you need to think about. When doing the listening section of the test, remember that both the general training and the academic training types of the test, they use the same listening. So there's no difference really in the type of questions that are going to come up. And in both cases, this is an interesting point, you do not need to have academic understanding of the English language. The types of questions that are going to come up are testing your overall comprehension. So you don't need to be thinking about academic language. All of the answers that you're going to put in the spaces are always going to be testing more general English. So please bear that in mind when you're preparing. You don't need to be studying difficult words, and you don't need to be able to kind of understand some science subject or geography when you are thinking about the academic academic or the general training of the listening test. So please bear that in mind. So the answer to this question, is listening test academic? Not really. Things are a little bit different for the reading test in IELTS. The first thing that you should remember is that you have two different types of tests when you're doing the general training and the academic training. When you do general training, you're going to have 4 sections which are 10 minutes, and you're going to have 1 section which is 20 minutes. Now, the 4 sections which are 10 minutes are usually very general in the type of language they use. So you should be prepared for having a really general knowledge of English in these cases. The third section, the 20-minute section, is a little bit more difficult, but again, you're not going to be faced with kind of a scientific language or anything that's really too difficult. It's a little bit different in the academic training test, because when you sit the academic test, you've got 3 sections and they're all 20 minutes and they're a bit longer, and the language that you use is going to be a bit more difficult. But, and I should remind you, the answers that you give and kind of the responses that you're required to think about will not be academic in nature. The text itself might have some academic language, but you do not need to understand certain principles, or it might be, for example, the Latin name for something. You don't need to know those in the test. You do need to understand the overall ideas around them, but in terms of the individual and the detailed content, you don't need to have academic understanding. So even though it's called the academic training, the reading section, you don't really need to have an academic knowledge. So that's something that you need to consider. A bit different to the listening section, but overall, do you need to have an academic understanding? Not really. You have to have a good reading speed, and you have to have general good overall comprehension, but not really academic comprehension. Super. So we've looked at reading, we've looked at listening. Let's talk about speaking now. And this is where we get lots of questions in videos that we make. A good example is when we give mock exams to students and you guys watch these videos. We get lots of comments to say, why did she not use academic language? I didn't hear any academic language in her speech. Let me tell you now, and if you learned something today, please give this video a like. The speaking section of the test does not require you to have academic language featured in your answer. And you will notice that from the band descriptors. Always pay attention to the band descriptors. If you don't know what they are, I'll put them in a link in the description below. Please remember that you do not need to use academic language in the speaking section. Speaking is your ability to make yourself understood, to have ideas flow. You need to expand on some ideas, but you don't need to include academic language. We get lots of people asking, can you use questions, or can you use rhetorical questions? Can you use language such as filler phrases like you know or like? Absolutely, it's completely normal, and that's everyday language. I would use that in my test. You should definitely use it in yours. When I've taken the test many times, I've always scored 9, and I have used language such as you know. So it's totally natural language. And remember, in the vocabulary, the lexical resource section of speaking, it asks you to use some less common language, some less common vocabulary. But that doesn't mean that you have to use academic language. And that's where the difference lies. You'll find that some tutors around the world, maybe in your country, they tell you that you have to use academic language. So please, you do not need to use academic language in your speaking test. You have to use natural, flexible, and appropriate language. I hope you learned something from that one. Let's talk about writing now. And the final section of the test is obviously the writing. We need to talk about this in 2 different forms because you have to do your general training and the academic training. So for the general training test, you're going to have your first answer, which is your letter. And you definitely don't need to use academic language here. Even if you're writing a formal letter, the type of language that you're using needs to resemble the tone of a formal letter. So you do need to learn some kind of important vocabulary there. And for your essay, you definitely need to use language which expresses your ideas, and it doesn't need to be academic in its content. And this is a really important point. And this is where there is some overlap between the general training and the academic training test, because it asks the same type of question. The academic training might be a little bit more abstract, and it might involve different styles of topics, but the overall answer should be somewhat similar, because in the test, it specifically asks you to give reasons for your answer, and it asks you to provide relevant examples from your own knowledge and experience. From your own knowledge and experience. And I see lots of comments which say, you used the word I believe that, or in my opinion. Well, let me tell you that because the question asks you to use examples from your own knowledge and experience, that's part of the task response, and you need to cover all parts of the task response. Therefore, it is reasonable and it is totally appropriate for you to use I and in my opinion, for example. We can talk about this till the cows come home in English, as we say, but I want to remind you that this is really important part of your test. You are taking the academic training test, but you do not need to use specific high-level academic words. So please bear that in mind when doing the writing. Remember that you should always follow the band descriptors. Very, very important. And let's have a look now at some homework, because I'm going to give you some homework now. I know that many of you require homework and you need a little bit of motivation. Well done for getting to the end of this video, first of all. You're doing a great job. Remember, you've got to study a couple of hours every day if you want to improve your overall language. It's important to listen to podcasts. It's important to read news from native English sites. Really, really, really critical that you do that. But let's look at some homework now. If you want to do this homework, it is completely optional, and you can write your answers in the comments section below. We love to read answers. We can't always give feedback on some answers, but we do require you guys to help each other. Give some feedback on each other's writing. It's a great opportunity for you to practice under the timed conditions. And remember, only spend 40 minutes on your test, because that's how long you get in your real test. The question is on the screen now. You should be able to see that. And it says, some people say that students should be given more homework. Others say that children should be free to enjoy their youth. Discuss both views and give your own opinion. And as I mentioned before, it does say, give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge and experience. So please try and do that when you do your test. It's really important that you include those answers. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope I've answered some of your questions. Don't forget, we've got lots and lots and lots of free videos, free content, sample answers, everything that you could possibly need for your IELTS preparation on the IELTS Daily website. You can see the link to that on the screen now. We can also give you lots of other free content every week. We have a free live class every Wednesday. I hope that you enjoy that class, and I hope to see you at that class, because it's great to see that people are so motivated to achieve their band score that they want. Well, that's the end of today's session. Thanks very much for joining me. My name is Chris from IELTS Daily, and please, if you like this video, if you learned something, please give me a thumbs up like on the video. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you for another video very soon.